Welcome to F1 Coffee Corner, Full Beans. I'm your host as always, Terry, and I'm here to keep you up to date with all of the unbiased, hard-hitting Formula 1 news. So grab your favourite mug of coffee, sit down, strap in and get yourself comfortable to join in the conversation. Because this is F1 Coffee Corner. This is Full Beans, the must-have podcast for all Formula 1 fans. Welcome to F1 Coffee Corner, Full Beans, the podcast. I'm your host, as always, Terry, and this is Season 3, Episode 2. Once again, thank you for joining me on this week's episode, where we delve into the latest from the world of Formula 1. And this week, we're going to be looking at the news that has dominated the headline, which is, of course, the introduction for the 2026 season of Madrid to the Formula 1 calendar. We're also going to be looking at the changing dynamics between AlphaTauri and Red Bull, and also AlphaTauri's new name change, which is just, well, dragging on and on and on with their latest Instagram post coming out yesterday. We still haven't got the new name. As I'm recording this podcast, that may change by the time it goes out. But as such, it's gone back to AlphaTauri. And we're going to be looking at the relationship between Oscar and Lando. And can McLaren keep that partnership going from strength to strength? Or actually, is it going to end in tears for one of the drivers? So, without further ado, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you'll be notified when these podcasts drop and they go live. And yeah, let's sit down, strap in, and give this week's episode some full beans. Welcome to episode 2. Now, I just want to start off by saying a massive thank you to episode 1 for season 3 and the launch last week. Had some great reviews on it, some great feedback, and I really appreciate everyone who tuned into the podcast. It's something I've said last week that I want to get better at. So here is episode 2, following in quick succession. Hopefully it'll be just as good. Hopefully you'll tune in once more. But let's get cracking. Let's get straight into it. Now, the first thing I want to talk about, I did a video on this earlier this week, and I just want to elaborate on it a bit more. And that is the change in dynamic to Red Bull and AlphaTauri and what the new structure looks like going forward. We've heard a lot from Peter Bear coming out recently about, you know, how AlphaTauri are no longer a junior team, they're more of a sister team to Red Bull, how that they want to be in their own right, how they're not going to be supporting rookies coming through. And it caused quite a few comments on, you know, well, actually, does that make the change of ownership, you know, relevant, that they shouldn't have the same owner? Or actually, should we just accept that they've got the same owner and they're just going to be treated as a different team, but it's no longer a junior team for the main team? And it got me thinking about how all this come about, because it is a massive change in dynamics. It's a massive change in the landscape of what AlphaTauri were set up to do originally as the feeder team to the main Red Bull team. And it is a conscious change that they're making. It's one that they're being open and honest about, which is great to see. But also, I think it's one that we need to delve into to get people to understand what that relationship is going to look like going forward, because it is going to be a very different relationship. Now, for those who have followed Formula 1 for a long time, you all know that when, you know, Toro Rosso came in, it was a feeder for AlphaTauri. It was a feeder team for them. So with that in mind, the rookies would come, they would hone their skills. You know, Seb did it. Then we had, obviously, you know, lots of Danny Ricciardo do it. Then Max came and did it, amongst many others. You know, Pierre Gasly, all of these drivers, they started off in that role and then got promoted up to Alex Albon, you know, just to name a few off the top of my head, who have come through that program of starting off with the junior team, progressing up to the main Red Bull team. And that was how it's been for a number of years. It was almost like a given. And do you know what? Everyone seemed pretty cool with that. But when Dietrich Mateschitz, when he passed away, there was a complete change in the dynamics at Red Bull in terms of the ownership. Now, when Dietrich was alive, the Formula 1 team was pretty much, you know, Dietrich's baby. Christian Horner, you know, and Helmut Marko, they've talked about this quite often, where they said when they wanted something done, they just picked up the phone, made a quick decision, made a quick call into Dietrich, who would say, yeah, go do it, no problem at all, off you go. And that's how Red Bull was run. It was run on a very personal relationship, with Helmut Marko being very much the middleman between Christian and Dietrich. Obviously, Christian over the years had built up that great relationship with Dietrich himself, so he had the ability to also make the phone calls and call the shots. But what happened is when Dietrich died, ownership changed hands. So it wasn't no longer a sole owner, so it's become a shared ownership. They've implemented a board for the motorsport side of Red Bull as well. So it's now got its own separate board, incorporated in from the football side that Red Bull had as well. So the whole political landscape has completely changed with Red Bull. Now, with that, they were looking at board level over what was the best thing to do with AlphaTauri, because we're in the middle of a boom in Formula One. The team itself can raise a lot of money from the sale. And Red Bull were naturally looking at that as a business decision to say, should we sell AlphaTauri and just keep Red Bull and get a load of money from that sale and still make a load of money from just having one team in Formula One? And they mulled it about a bit. And I think that's what changed the 2023 season. If you look at the start of the season, we had Nick De Vries in, who wasn't a Red Bull junior coming up. We look at, Yuki goes hand in hand with the Honda partnership. It's a given that he's going to be there. That's part of the deal with Honda, and it will be until they no longer get Honda engines in 2026. As we've seen with all these contract extensions, Yuki's just seems to go through on a one-year deal. I'm expecting the same again for the next year, and I'm expecting the same for 2025, that Yuki will be the second AlphaTauri driver. However, once they switch to obviously their own Red Bull powertrain engine supported by Ford, I think that's when Yuki will lose his seat, and maybe Aston Martin pick him up as part of that deal, but that's a whole separate conversation. But with these changing dynamics, what's happened is, when they set at the start last season, they were like, should we sell them, should we not? So they went down this different development route, because I feel that they didn't want to give AlphaTauri all of the information from Red Bull in case they sold the team. It's like giving your competition the blueprints to your success. Why would you do that? So imagine if they'd been sold to someone who's then got their hand on a load of the RB19 parts, or even the RB18 parts that were being developed, and they could see where Red Bull were going. So it was very much Red Bull keeping their cards close to their chest, saying, actually, you go down your own route, we supply the engine with Honda, we supply all the other bits, but we're not going to take a big chunk of this package that we've got available to us. And that's what they did on that front. So I do think that's what happened at the start of last season. I think that they then made the choice to keep AlphaTauri. Then we saw obviously Danny coming back in. Then we've seen this massive change. So Peter Bear coming in, and we're hearing all of this talk about how now they're going to be their own standalone team. They're no longer the junior team. And, they're getting big name sponsors coming in. We know that the talk is Visa and Cash App that they're going to change to. We also, heard that it was going to be Hugo Boss before that. So there is big name signings coming to AlphaTauri in terms of the brand. So what we're seeing is this team becoming its own. They're going to take more from Red Bull in terms of technical partnership. Now, that's not illegal in any way. Before people jump into the comments, that's what every other team does with their engine partnership. It's what it has to do with Ferrari. It's what Williams and Aston Martin do with Mercedes, and even McLaren to an extent with the engine supply from Mercedes as well. So that isn't anything illegal. What it's doing is they're taking the most out of the parts they can get. So they're saying, actually, instead of 100 parts, when we could have 200, we're going to take the full 200, and we're going to go more along their way of development, because why not? That car was so good. Which, again, makes perfect business sense if you're keeping the team and you want to get that team up. Now, I don't for 1 minute believe that AlphaTauri are ever going to get up to a place where they can compete with Red Bull. But if they can get high enough up in the championship, that's a load of prize money that's coming Red Bull's way, when you think they're going to get the money from Red Bull competing at the top. And if you get AlphaTauri into like the 5th, 6th place in the Constructors' Championship, the prize money alone will pay for the team. So it's kind of like a no-brainer to why they're doing it. But Peter Bear is doing this very big statement to everyone, saying, we are different. We are no longer this team. This is what we're going to be. We're going to be a Formula One team. And that's where I think Zach Brown's going with his arguments that we touched on in last week's episode about there needs to be clear guidelines, and is this the right thing to do? Is this the right way? Because he's seeing direct competition. He's seeing the team that's sneaking up through the pack with this Red Bull collaboration they've got, potentially getting to 5th and 6th, which, if you're a McLaren fan, that's currently around about where they are. So you're going to be hitting that. Alpine are going to be another team looking over their shoulder with the rise of AlphaTauri themselves. So I think what we're seeing is, I think I called it the other day, where we're seeing that Dietrich's passion for motorsport, which was obvious, is now Red Bull's business. It's a business decision to keep AlphaTauri, and for that they need to make money. To make money, the best way is to make them more competitive. To make them more competitive, you increase the collaboration with Red Bull to give them the best parts on the market. You also try and give them the best driver partnership whilst adhering to your sponsors, i.e. Yuki. Danny gives them someone who has the potential to score really good points. Is great from a PR point of view as well. Was on the pace when he did the tyre test, so he had that going for him. Okay, he had the accident, and then subsequently when he came back, he wasn't as strong as he was. That's understandable. I think with a whole pre-season under him, ready to hit the grid, and with the knowledge that he's secure in his seat for a year, with that car development going as it is and getting better and better, we might just see an inspired Danny Ricciardo who is chasing that second Red Bull seat, does want Checo's seat, does have a point to prove, and what better way than to give him the tools to do it and kind of dangle the carrot of saying, go on then, show us what you can do. So I'm expecting big things from AlphaTauri. Now, in terms of their name change, now, this just feels like it's either the best marketing ploy ever or it's just one big mess, which you couldn't make up if you tried. Now, if you've been on social media, you would have seen that about 4 or 5 days ago, they changed their Instagram handle to Visa Cash App RB. That's what they changed it to. Now, they then kind of locked themselves out of it. We heard nothing for like 4 days from AlphaTauri. They quickly changed it back. All the posts are gone. User not found. All of this sort of stuff. Then they came back yesterday as AlphaTauri with a sort of monologue video, with a levers video to the name AlphaTauri and all the stuff they've achieved. So that went up. And then they posted literally last night with B.RB, which many people are interpreting. What does that look like? Is that, be right back? Is that Boss Red Bulls even? Baby Red Bull seems to be the most common one going around. But so they're obviously teasing the new brand. We haven't got confirmation when their livery is going to be. We haven't got confirmation what the new name's going to be. We're all assuming that the Visa Cash App thing was a mistake and we've all seen it. But then I think it was actually posted on my page. It's like, what if it's been like a ploy and it's actually Boss Red Bulls, which is what we heard way, way, way back, like 6 months ago. I mean, what if this is the ultimate hustle from Red Bull and that Visa and Cash App are going to be on the car as sponsors, but they've actually just teased the name deliberately to create this buzz about it? I don't think so. I'm not sure that those two teams would be, those two companies would be willing to lend themselves to it. But you never know. It could happen. Stranger things happen in the world of Formula One. I still think we're going to get Visa Cash App RB. I think the RB stands for Racing Bulls. It might be abbreviated down to RB, but I do think that's the name we're going to get once all of this has played itself out. So I think we're going to a couple of days. I think we're about to get a car launch date, and then that will then give us the name as well. So that's where I think we're going with that. I think we're going to see a different change in the style of it. I think that with their newfound status as a standalone team, they're going to move what they can to Milton Keynes to save on costs, which is where Zach's got to be in his bonnet about. And I think they're going to be in a position where they're going to be able to challenge, certainly in the middle of the pack, and move it from the bottom of the pack with that collaboration with Red Bull in terms of the RB19 parts they're going to get, and also some of the RB20 parts they're going to get when that comes through as well. So I think it's quite exciting times on the grid in terms of AlphaTauri. I think now that Red Bull have got this model set up to what they want it to be, I think now they're getting the backing of the sponsors to make it standalone team. We're going to go back to seeing them compete on a much higher level, a much bigger level, which can only be good for Formula One, let's be honest about it, in terms of competition. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on it. Now, in terms of drivers, we're going to cover drivers as a bit of a whole sort of thing, because we have got 2024. We have got the ultimate in the driver's city market. So let me take a sip of the coffee and let's get into driver news and what I think is going on at the moment. So yeah, driver news. So who do I think is going to be driving next year for AlphaTauri and Red Bull? Now, Max is a shoehorn, so Max will stay with Red Bull as long as Max wants to be a Red Bull driver. Let's be honest about it. That's his criteria. It's up to him to decide when he retires or moves on to another sport. The same as what Lewis Gollum would say is, I think once those contracts come up for negotiation, they are pure and simple. Do you want to carry on? So I don't for 1 minute believe that we're going to see a change with Max. Checo for me is a really interesting one. Now, I spent last season defending Checo quite a lot. He got a lot of criticism from people saying that he should have been fired. They should have changed the driver over. They should have put Danny in. For me personally, I see it from a very different point of view. I think when you start the season off, you start off with a target. Now, the target for Red Bull is always going to be Max is the world champion, and Checo's would have been to try and get number 2 in the constructors, and as a team to seal both championships. So drivers for Max and the constructors for Red Bull. Now, with that in mind, Checo did his job. Yes, his performances waned off. Yes, he had some really sort of bad dips in the form, but ultimately he achieved the goal that was set to him. In his contract or in his negotiation with Helmut, with Christian, they would have said to him, you need to get second place. He did that. Now, in years to come, you won't remember how he got second place. You'll just look at the championship and go, oh, Checo was in second. So I'm in absolute agreement that his performances need to improve. I'm in absolute agreement that he's no way guaranteed a Red Bull seat after this season. But I think if we get to the summer break, and I think actually if Checo is performing at a level which is acceptable to Red Bull, and he is kind of competing with Max in terms of, trying to get race wins, regular podiums, good point scoring for Red Bull, he's got massive commercial success in the American markets, down in Mexico, obviously. When they do America, they use Checo for their marketing. They don't use Max for it at all. We keep hearing that Max got booed and Checo gets cheered. When it comes to, obviously, Austin, when it comes to even Vegas, obviously Mexico is going to be Checo all the way through. So he does have a massive marketing ability that we don't see here in the UK. He has a lot of personal sponsors as well that he brings in as well. So there is a lot of value to keeping him, especially if Red Bull are getting both championships and are competing, because there's also a bit like Max and Checo relationship. You kind of look at Lewis and Valtteri, where Lewis was quite happy with Valtteri as a teammate. And I think Max, we had a few years ago that blip in Brazil, but apart from that, I think he's happy having Checo as a teammate. Whether or not that's because he maybe feels that Checo isn't going to challenge him long term, I don't know. I'm not sure that would worry Max, if I'm honest. But I do think that the dynamics is good for Red Bull. I think it's something that works for them. It's something that they want to keep. And I'm not quite sure whether with AlphaTauri wanted to be standalone, whether or not they would be willing to then move Danny, who's potentially their star, into Red Bull and lose that marketability from AlphaTauri that they're obviously gaining with sponsorship and moving at the pack, like we said. So I'm not sure we're going to see Danny in the Red Bull. I know he wants to. Ultimately, he wants to compete for wins and championships. That's what Danny wants to do, especially before he retires. So I can understand his desire to do it. But what I don't think is whether or not that's replicated by Red Bull. I think if they wanted to, they would have already made that move happen last year. So I'm not sure we're going to see that. I think Liam Lawson's going to come in. He may be an outside bet for Red Bull in 2025. So do they not go with Checo and bring Liam in very much in a supporting role to Max, in the sense of putting an arm around him and showing him the ropes? We know traditionally that's not really worked for Red Bull, so I'm not sure they would want to go down that route, because what if it goes the same way as, Alex, Pierre, all of the swaps they made and had to make back? Doesn't look good for business, doesn't look good for the teams, doesn't look like actually it's something that they want to be associated with in terms of casting a driver out. So I'm not sure they would make that risk. You then wonder, could that see Danny get promoted and Liam Lawson in the AlphaTauri next to Yuki? That's an outside possibility. That could happen. But then I worry about what the marketability of AlphaTauri would be based on that lineup. It doesn't shout star power in terms of getting sponsors and sponsorship. But if you've already secured that sponsorship on the back of a multi-year deal by having Danny in the car this year, you don't need to worry about that. So maybe that's an option for them as well. In terms of other drivers, what's going on? We know we've got 14 drivers out of contract. At the end of this year, it's absolutely, I've never known a season like it. I've never known a summer break that's going to be like it. I think what we're hearing now with all of these moves is we're hearing, drivers' agents jostling for position. Now, a lot of the agents, they want to get this signed up like now. They won't want to wait till summer. They want to get a long-term deal done, especially if the driver's happy at the team. So I'm expecting Lando to have a contract extension announced by Zach Brown before we get to summer break. I'm expecting Charles to sign on a long-term multi-year deal for Ferrari. We've heard whispers about it all winter. I don't think there's any inkling from Ferrari to change Charles. I don't think Charles wants to go anywhere else. I don't think there's anywhere else at the top that can take Charles. So I'm pretty confident we're going to get that one. Carlos is a bit outside bet. I think we're going to get a 2-year deal to take him up to 2026, when I think that will leave both Carlos and Ferrari's options open in terms of obviously Audi coming in and what that looks like. I think we know that Mercedes are locked in. That will lock obviously McLaren in. Aston Martin, I think they're going to do a 2-year deal with Alonso. I think that'll take him into 2026. It will take him into the new Spanish Grand Prix, which will come on to the next segment. So I think that fits with that. And obviously they've then got Lance, who will just carry on unless he wants to go. Again, I think Lance falls into the Max and Lewis relationship of he decides when he wants to go, not the team. So I think it's a very different dynamic to whether or not he wants to continue racing within Formula One to when he actually gets his driver change and loses his seat. I don't think it's a business decision that they would make, if that makes sense. So that will then leave the bottom end of the grid in terms of fighting for it. We got Haas. Now, Haas, do they keep with 2 established drivers? Now, that's not really working for them at the moment. We know their car's probably going to be poor starting off with. So do they then go outside of it a bit? So do they look to Ferrari for Ollie Behrman to get some experience? So partner a seasoned pro of either Magnussen and Hülkenberg with Ollie Behrman, and then that kind of pacifies the people at Ferrari that they're using when they're academy drivers. Very similar deal to George going to Williams, get some experience at lower level, really fits for them. Obviously, then you've got Ollie as a potential if something happened to Carlos or you wanted to bring somebody in different. So they've got that option as well. You've then got, Williams with Logan Sargent, Alex Albon. Does Alex stay? Does he go? If the Williams doesn't perform as well as it did last season, this season, so what if Williams drop back off and they go back towards sort of 9th, 10th? Does Alex Albon then look at a drive further up if the opportunity arises himself? Logan Sargent needs a big season because he's going to be in trouble otherwise. I think if he gets to the summer break and he's not scoring points and he's not near Alex, I think it's curtains for Logan. So that can see someone coming in, maybe someone like a Drugovic coming in. Mercedes may want to pull their arm, the same as Ferrari want to do with Haas. So do we get a Vesti, Kimi Angeloni even being propped up if he has a stellar season? Do we get something like that happen? There's all these options which can happen in terms of the bottom end of the grid. Now, we've also got Alpine is a really interesting scenario. So we know that Alpine are going to be out of the running until the new engine regulations. They've talked a lot about they haven't got the brake horsepower. They haven't got the capability to compete in this current era. So will Gasly and Ocon stay or will one of them go? But again, where does one of them go? So I think we're going to have a domino effect. So we're going to have something similar to like when Seb retired and we get this knock-on effect. It will take one driver, one move, and then that'll be it. Then once that's done, it'll be, can we actually see the shakeout as it pans out, and can we see who's going where? We know that's one of the reasons Mercedes moved quick to lock down their drivers. We know that Red Bull locked down Max a few years ago now. We know that McLaren are locked down, but obviously want to give that extension to Lando to stop him going to Red Bull. In terms of Lando to Red Bull, I keep saying this, I don't see it happening, not unless Max wasn't there. Because why would Lando go to Red Bull to be a second driver? It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. The reason that might happen, though, takes us quite nicely into the next segment of the podcast, which is Oscar and Lando. So yeah, that's my thoughts on drivers' moves. Let me know in the comments who you think is going to move and to where. And are we going to get one big shake-up, or are we actually going to get a series of contract extensions and no one really moving? Before we move on, we've got to mention, obviously, the Stake F1 guys, Joe and Bottas. I think they're at real risk this season as well. Joe seems to be at risk if things don't go his way. Valtteri, I think, will get another season at least, but obviously wants to stay with Audi. I think they're giving him a 1-year deal, taking through to the new regulations, taking through to when Audi come on board. So I think that Valtteri might be okay for another year. I think Joe's probably in a bit more trouble than Valtteri, that's for sure. So 2024 driver market is going to be silly. It's going to be absolutely crazy, or it's going to be absolute washout and they're all going to sign where they are. And that will bring us quite nicely into the next part, which is going to be Oscar and Lando and McLaren. So let's get right into that one. Now, a lot of talk about McLaren being competitive this year. So a lot of talk around, can McLaren make that step up? Can they start competing again for race wins? We saw this dramatic improvement halfway through last season. We saw it get better and better and better. Once both drivers had the upgrades, we saw them competing. Oscar obviously got the sprint win. Lando got regular podiums. On paper, their partnership looks really strong. On paper, they look like they got, for me, probably one of the strongest pairings. But it also kind of gives me, Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton vibes, where you feel it could go that way. You feel that if there's an instant, or, if there's a lot of talk about what happens if Oscar gets the win before Lando. And I do think that's a big stumbling block for McLaren to overcome. Now, Andrea Stella has come out this week and said, it won't be a problem. If Oscar wins before Lando, it'll prove to Lando that the car's capable, it's in a good place, and, he will see it that way. I'm not convinced. I don't share Andrea's thoughts on that. I think if Oscar beats Lando, I think Lando has to respond either straight away by getting a win, or I think confidence-wise it's going to hit him really hard. I'm still jury out on Lando, and I keep saying this, and I get a lot of heat for it. But for me, he's not done enough to show that he can take that next step up. He's someone who can get podiums, but in terms of race wins, that killer instant, I've not seen it yet from Lando. Now, I'm not saying it's not there. I'm just saying that from a fan point of view, who's not an avid Lando fan, I certainly haven't seen enough to tell me that he's got what it takes to get that win. We see that difference in the drivers, in the Maxes, Lewis's, and I don't think I've seen that enough in Lando. So hopefully that changes and we get that. I think that McLaren can really compete. I think their new technical structure, talked about this on previous podcasts, is really good. The way they've designed it is really good. The new people coming in is really good. It will only get better and better and better. So I think the McLaren are going to be a team to watch. I think they're going to be a team on the move. I think they're going to be a team which could well challenge if they can get it right. I worry that in terms of development, they showed too much at the end of last season, and that maybe they're not going to make as big gains this year because they're continuing last year's car without it being a major reshuffle, because obviously they were late to the party with their development because of the mistakes they made. So that, I think, for me, is a bit of a worry. Will some of the other teams get the jump back on them? So your Mercedes, your Aston Martins, will they be able to get that leap in performance to get them ahead? Is probably where I'm thinking with that one. But I think that, like I say, it's got very much Nico and Lewis vibes for me. I think it's a very careful dynamic that's going to have to be watched. It's going to have to be managed very closely. Mercedes PR seems to be, McLaren PR, seems to be working overdrive at the moment. Lots of gossip about Lando, off-track activities, which isn't really helpful at all. A lot of talk about Red Bull. There seems to be a lot of noise around Lando at the moment, which he just needs to probably get the new season underway, get back on track and start getting performances in there to take some of that away. Because even though it's not his fault, it seems to be following him a bit in terms of, is he going to Red Bull? What's happening with the rumours about his off-track activities? All these things aren't good. But I think that Zach likes him. I think Zach's got a lot of faith in him. We know that Lando's dad, ploughed heavily into Lando coming up. And obviously with that, spent a lot getting him into McLaren, spent a lot helping McLaren out over the years as well. So I think there's a sort of, not ownership thing, but I think that, Zach sees Lando as definitely someone for the future. He wants to keep him. We know they've got business interests together. We know that his dad's been involved in McLaren and getting Lando up. So I think all the signs point to a Lando contract extension, which will take him probably, through to probably around the same time as Max in terms of, 2028, that sort of things, and just take him off the market. I wouldn't be surprised to see McLaren try and do that early so they can lock down the season and go, he's not ours. Zach's already said that if Red Bull want him, they're going to have to pay a massive amount in compensation. That's not really Red Bull style, so I don't see that happening either. So I think Lando's going to stay where he is. I think that Oscar and Lando could be dynamite to watch this season. I really do. Oscar, for me, is a born winner. He's someone who has come up through the ranks, won at every level, shows no fear. He's only going to be better in his second season. Now he knows the tracks. He's only going to be better now he's been in Formula One. And I think that's pretty worrying if you're Lando, especially if Oscar comes out the gate full-blown, getting wins, getting podiums, puts Lando on the back foot. Lando strikes me as someone who's very confidence-driven, needs that confidence. We've heard about him talk about the mental health side of things. We've heard about McLaren bringing someone in to help him with that. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's being open, honest, and I praise both Lando and McLaren for broaching that subject because it's clearly in motorsport. We don't hear enough of it. And lots of other teams in terms of, sports teams, they use sports psychologists loads of times. Yeah, they've got them on the books even. So I don't know why Formula One isn't open more about it. It's a very results-driven sport. It's very high pressure. Why you wouldn't have access to these sort of people coming in to help you is beyond me. And I do think the drivers get it. I just don't think there's enough made about how they get it and who gives them that. I think it's kind of frowned upon still and seen as a sign of weakness in Formula One terms, which I want to see change. I want to see them being open and honest about that. So hopefully that works out for them. I think that Oscar's going to be the one to watch for me. I said it last season, I'm going to say it again this season, but I think Lando's got a lot to prove, and I think that if Lando comes out with a bit between his teeth, that could put Oscar on the back foot. So again, the dynamic between those two could change. At the moment, it's all smiles, it's all pally, but it only takes one incident, one result. We've seen it before, we've seen it over the years, for it to all just go downhill. So I do think it's one to keep an eye on. I think that Ocon and Gasly is the other one to keep an eye on. I think that could go the same way. I think those two are just, I said last year, I think they're just waiting for something to happen. George and Lewis is probably the only other partnership. Charles and Carlos is probably the other one. So I think there's some really dynamics within the top teams over the two drivers. And if one driver gets a better start or is more in the championship hunt than the other one, we're going to see some really interesting dynamics. Lewis is never going to play second fiddle to George, for instance. And Carlos, whilst I think Charles is a better driver, I think that Carlos has been more consistent. So I think that Carlos is going to be using that to his advantage. Wants that new long-term contract. I think he wants to stay with Ferrari. He wants to prove that he can do it over Charles. I think the top team's got some really interesting dynamics there. I think we might start seeing that landscape change over the next few seasons, that's for sure. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on that one. But Oscar and Lando is definitely one to watch for 2024, that's for sure. Right, let's come on to the big news for the week. Let's come on to the news that got everybody talking. Not AlphaTauri's new name, we covered that. Madrid 2026. So we started getting the noise last week that we are going to get an announcement this week on Madrid. Monday night, we saw some leaked pictures, which was, the countdown on the website. And then we saw some leaked footage of the centre in Madrid where it was decked out with Formula 1 logos, 2026, welcome back Madrid. So that kind of told us what we needed to know, that Madrid was coming back. Obviously, we got the announcement yesterday at 9:30 that Madrid will be back. It's coming back on a 10-year deal. 5.4 kilometres, if my memory serves me correct. 20 corners. Don't quote me if I've got some of these wrong, because they are off the top of my head. So 20 corners, 5.4 kilometres. Will be a mixture in terms of the track. Now, what that means is if you look at the track currently, it's not a traditional street circuit. Now, half of it around the centre is going to be the streets of Madrid, but the other half is actually going to be on purpose-built private land, which is going to be purpose-built racetrack, which won't be used by traffic all year round. So that's why they're calling it like a hybrid system, where half it's going to be a street circuit, half it's actually going to be a purpose-built racetrack. My hope is that with a purpose-built racetrack, they might be able to actually get some good race on there, hopefully some good overtaking opportunities. Looking at the plans, they don't convince me they've done that, which is really disappointing. A lot of talk about, what about Vegas? The one thing I will say about Vegas is, was Vegas a good track, or was it a case of, because we had no data, that's why Vegas was good? The key for Vegas is going to be what happens this year in terms of the track and the grid and the performance, because ultimately last year we had no data, we had no comparison, and we got a good race. But that could have just been because no one knew how to set your car up. That could just been no one knew what strategy to use. This year we're going to have all that data. So for me, it's going to be interesting to see what Vegas does this year in terms of whether or not Vegas was a good race, or was it a good race because it was new and on the calendar. And I think it could be that reason. I'm not sure Vegas is going to produce the spectacle that we had last year. But anyway, back to Madrid. Madrid is on the calendar, 10 years, 2026. Now, that obviously means what happens to Barcelona. We're hearing a lot about that. Now, Barcelona currently has a contract up to and including 2026. So as it stands, Barcelona is on the calendar for 2026. Stefano Domenicato, he came out yesterday, said the door's still open. We got ongoing negotiations. It's not the end for Barcelona. Personally, I think it is. I can't see that there's enough of a market in Madrid to produce two races. I don't think it's a country which would warrant having multiple races. A lot of talk about, could it become the European one where we alternate the tracks back? I would like to see that, but I can't see that happening from 2026 because it's too soon. You can't get the other tracks up to date. It would be a shame to start losing the likes of Hungary, likes of Spa, even likes of Silverstone in exchange to get it once every 2-3 years. I think that would be a really bad move by Formula 1. So I do think it is the end for Barcelona. Interestingly, the race organisers behind Barcelona are the same race organisers behind Madrid. So from their point of view, it's going to mean nothing to just rip last year the contract up and move to Madrid. It doesn't affect them in any way because they're the ones promoting the race. So they're still going to get their money from a new Grand Prix. So I don't think that paying off the last year or not doing the last year is going to be an issue for Barcelona if they don't want to. A lot of talk about it's a street circuit in exchange for a traditional track. Now, I said this last time, I'm not Barcelona's biggest fan by any stretch of imagination. I'm not going to sit here and be like some people and pretend that Barcelona is the most amazing track ever and we've lost this great track. We haven't. It's an okay track. It's been made better by the improvements to put it back to the old layout last year. For me, it's more about the teams. And what I mean by that is Barcelona used to be the testing track for Formula 1. We used to obviously do Barcelona, then we went to Bahrain for the second test. Then that changed and we just went to Bahrain. The reason Barcelona is really good for the teams is because they use it to get a lot of data. A lot of the corners and the layout in Barcelona allows them to see how the cars will react in places like Silverstone, places like Monza. It allows them to bring upgrades to the car and run those upgrades and use that data to see if they're on the right track. And they're going to lose that ability by that. Now, no one wants to see Formula 1 using races for testing. Let's be honest about it. It's not what we want. We want to see racing. But it was a handy byproduct of being in Barcelona. It was something the teams enjoyed because they knew they could get that data. Most teams you'll see would have rushed to introduce an upgrade around Barcelona time, get that upgrade up and running, get it gone, get that data back, see they're on the right track, spread out for the rest of the season. By losing that, they're going to effectively lose all of that data. And I'm sure that's going to hit the teams hard. Now, whether or not it's enough of a reason to keep Barcelona, I'm not entirely sure. In terms of Madrid, they're talking about it being accessible. So 14 kilometres or something away from the city centre. 90% can get to it by a rail in terms of the metro and the trams. I think it was Connor put on my page that the metro looks absolutely disgusting in Madrid. I've never been, so I couldn't comment. I'm sure that it'll get a lick of paint. So I'm sure the infrastructure around the Grand Prix area will get some much needed cash injection, which is always good. Why are we getting street circuits was the other question I got last night when I was on live. Mainly because they're really commercially viable for Formula One. So we're talking 140,000 once they're up to full capacity each day. That's a massive amount of people in a local area, in a city centre. And that is a huge knock onto the economy. One of the successes of Vegas was the commercial value that it brought to the area. Yes, it causes disruption. Yes, it causes aggravation. But if you're a local business owner and you tap into it right, it can also be extremely lucrative to have in Formula One on your doorstep. So there's that side of it. I think that Formula One like it because it's a lot easier to manage. They can offset a lot of the costs. So we find that local amenities are maintained and updated by the governments there, the councils there. They kind of do a lot of work as well as Formula One in terms of upgrading the roads, upgrading toilets, pit buildings. Pit buildings get used all year round once they build a purpose-built one. So there's like a commercial benefit that way as well. So I think there is lots of reasons to why we're seeing this street circuit introduction. We know some of the traditional tracks are really hard to get to. So if you take Spa, for example, you have to travel into it by coach. Getting there isn't the easiest way. And I think Formula One want to try with their carbon footprint. I don't think Formula One will be net zero by 2030. I don't think the sport allows them to, because I mean, how many people catch a flight? How many flights do Formula One themselves take in terms of freight, teams, race calendar? So I think that the net zero one is a bit of a hypocritical view. They're not going to be net zero, but I do think they're trying to make it more accessible. They're trying to make it so that actually you can drop in. Madrid's by the airport as well, so the idea is you're dropping on the airport, stay at a local hotel, possibly in the city centre, then get on a tram, go to the Grand Prix. Sounds perfect. And why not? Why not? It's a good footprint, but I think that we've got over a third now of street circuits. I think that's a risk for Formula One. Cars are going to be smaller, going to be lighter, should be easier to overtake. But I think ultimately you run that risk that if you alienate the core market, which want racing, by introducing street tracks all the time, what happens when the boom goes from Formula One? You've lost those people who were at the grassroots, who have gone off to do other things. And ultimately, that's what Formula E does. It races on street circuits. So surely, if you look at 2026, we've got more electrification, we've got street circuits. Haven't we already got that with Formula E? Don't they kind of then start getting too much of a crossover? I don't know. Like I say, I'm not a huge fan of them. I think the street circuits, some are good, some bad. Some are just kept like Monaco, I think, because their heritage value. Would I like to see Monaco replaced? I suppose the debate now is, would you replace Barcelona and Monaco? So would you take out Monaco and put Barcelona over it? I probably still wouldn't. I'll probably keep Monaco. So I think for me, that's a telltale sign that Barcelona is going to go. The street circuits have a long-term contract. The reason they have a long-term contract of like 10 years is because they need that stability, because they're tapping into local areas. So they need to be able to have a lot of years to reap the benefits of it. It's a lot of outlay. It's a lot of disruption. It's a lot of money that the companies have to put forward to host a Grand Prix. So they need the security of a multi-year deal, which is why we keep seeing street circuits coming on with 10 years, 15 years, very long contracts, whereas we keep seeing traditional tracks only get 1 or 2 year extension, 3 or 4 year extension, because it lets Formula One have the options open. So in terms of Madrid, I'm going to hold reservation to what the racing is going to look like. The final track will look different. It hasn't gone through FIA hemoglobination at all, so it's not gone through that final check of what it looks like. We haven't seen cars go around it in terms of any sim data. We've just seen a plan. So until I see that, I'm reserving a bit of judgment on it. But for me, Madrid's a bit of a no. I don't think it should be ahead of Barcelona. I think it's a shame to lose Barcelona. I certainly think it's got a massive benefit, Barcelona, to the teams on the calendar, which in turn creates better racing because of the development going forward. So yeah, that's just my views on it. Let me know what you think about it. But another street circuit isn't the answer for me. And I'm genuinely starting to get worried that we're seeing far too many on the Formula One calendar. And that's it, I think. I think that's it for this week's episode. I want to thank you once again for tuning in. If you do get a chance, hit that subscribe button, hit that follow button. If you want to catch me on all of my other social medias, it's F1 Coffee Corner over all of the channels. My content is pretty much broadcast now on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Threads, not that big on X or Twitter, we call it, YouTube as well. So if you do like more of this content, you want to hear more, obviously the podcast comes out and gives you a roundup of the news, but all of those channels will give you daily news, will give you breaking news. So if you do like Formula One, you do like news, you want to get latest, you want to get factual up-to-date news, then yeah, hit that follow button. And once again, really appreciate you tuning in, and I'll see everyone next time. So have a great week, and remember, we're one step closer to car launch. Next week is February. February means car launch. February means testing. And then we're into March, where Formula One's back. So, yeah, keep that one in the back of your mind. I'll see you all next week.